question. What's the best way to get into enemy territory, hit them hard and make it back home undetected and unharmed?
The answer, with one of these, a bomber. Bombers have evolved rapidly in the past 100 years in an unending race to keep the upper hand over the enemy.
But just exactly how have they become such crucial weapons in the theatre of war? War and conflict have sadly always been a part of human existence, and the side with the most advanced technology has almost always won. For centuries, that meant surprising the enemy with a new sword, gun, tank, or torpedo. But it was always at sea or on very firm dry land.
So just imagine the shock to the enemy when this happened for the first time. The first recorded bomb dropped by plane was dispatched in 1911 in Libya by an Italian officer called Giulio Gaffotti against enemy Turks who described it as most ungentlemanly. Well, that's one way of putting it. It's hard to imagine today just what a radical new way of waging war this was at the time. After all, it was only a few years earlier that mankind had actually invented the aeroplane, or flying machine, as the Edwardians called these fine wooden cloth devices. Taking to the skies with a bomb gave you a huge strategic advantage over your unsuspecting enemy, who didn't have the weapons to fight back. How utterly unfair. Early bombers weren't that sophisticated. In fact, they weren't bombers at all. Meet the Bristol F-2B with its V12 Rolls-Royce Falcon 3 engine.
Built in 1917, basically a wooden fabric construction, in its day this aircraft was incredibly agile. Primarily a fighter, it was designed for reconnaissance and shooting other planes down.
So how could you drop bombs from something like this? Well, flying nice and low on a clear day, you first had to find your target. With no navigational aids, it was down to what you could see with your own eyes. Target found, you loaded your bomb thus, and then just dropped it over the side. That was all there was to it.
Except that it proved incredibly difficult to actually hit anything. Let me illustrate. There's my target. Here's my bomb. Chocks away, Ginger. Bomb doors open and drop. Ah!
The problem is that when you let go of the bomb directly over the target, rather than falling straight down, the forward momentum of the moving aircraft is transferred to the bomb. So it carries on flying in the same direction as you are, completely overshooting the target.
Bomb doors open, Wilco. Bomb doors open.
The trick is to work out just the right moment to drop it ahead of the target, taking into account that forward momentum.
Well, as you can see, I scored a hit, but in the heat of the battle, it would all be a bit trial and error, let's face it.
So the answer was to drop more bombs to improve the chances of a hit, a capability addressed by the first purpose-built bombers. Vastly improved engine power made a massive difference. This is a 1934 Hawker Hind, and its Rolls-Royce Kestrel engine produced 640 horsepower, which meant that the plane could be built more solidly out of metal. It also meant that it could fly faster and further, and it could also carry more bombs. It had these dedicated bomb racks that meant you could drop more bombs more quickly, more accurately. But by the beginning of the Second World War, the bomber's honeymoon was over. New weapons and radar technology meant the enemy could see you coming, and had a better chance of shooting you down than you had of hitting them, causing some talk of scrapping the air bombing campaign altogether.
Bit of enemy fire got me in the wrong place. How dare they? But in 1942, after years of despondency, a massive new plane radically reversed the Allies' fortunes. It tackled these problems head-on and dramatically increased destructive power. And here it is. the fantastic and hero-making Avro Lancaster.
From its introduction in 1942 to the end of the war in 1945, over 7,000 fought their way through the skies. They unleashed an incredible 2/3 of Britain's total bombing tonnage, emphatically reclaiming the bomber's strategic advantage.
So how did the Lancaster manage to achieve all this? Well, first of all, an important ingredient was plenty of this.
Four superb engines, 1,500 horsepower Rolls-Royce Merlins, the same engine that was behind the phenomenal success of the Spitfire. The 12-cylinder 48-valve Merlin has a capacity of 27 litres. These engines and 6 large fuel tanks gave the bomber a range of 2,000 miles at speeds of up to 275 miles an hour. And they enabled it to fly at an altitude busting 20,000 feet, helping it to avoid enemy flak. No longer was the bomber a fighter or ordinary plane modified for the task. The Lancaster was designed and built around its bomb bay.
And what a bomb bay! 33 feet by 5 feet and able to carry a maximum of 22,000 pounds of bombs. It could also carry a range of different bombs, including these, weighing 4,000 pounds apiece.
Enough to destroy an entire street.
The massive Tallboy bombs weighing 12,000 pounds.
Ideal for taking out really large buildings like factories.
Or one single 22,000 pound Grand Slam earthquake bomb, the heaviest ever produced.
Which could penetrate 30 feet of concrete and were used to flatten reinforced military installations. With this massive payload, the Lancaster led a devastating new campaign of bombing. It was focused not just on traditional military targets, but also cities, factories, and civilians. The Germans responded with dramatic improvements to their radar, enabling bomber squadrons to be detected 100 miles away.
As well as the tough all-metal airframe, helping the Lancaster and its crew reach the targets unscathed were its gunner positions. Fore, mid, and aft. These turrets were power swiveling, giving the guns incredible target tracking ability against more agile fighter planes.
A much better means of staying alive was to fly under cover of darkness, which the Lancaster did for most of the war. Unescorted day sorties over long distances were regarded as virtually suicidal. Night flying reduced casualties, but it made navigation and targeting tougher than ever. Imagine flying at 15,000 feet at 275 miles an hour and trying to locate and hit a target in complete darkness.
It's called blind bombing, and it was something that everyone on night raids had to get used to. The principle was that if you knew where your target was on the map, you simply had to keep track of your own position so you'd know when you had arrived. Simple in theory, much tougher in practice.
Traditionally, this was done by what's known as dead reckoning, based on speed, direction, and wind deflection calculations.
The Lancaster saw the introduction of numerous electronic aids to improve this process, and the ultimate system was H2S, as fitted to this later Lancaster and identified by this pod underneath.
It was radar-based and gave the navigator a pictorial image of the key landmarks ahead of and below the plane, helping him correct the course towards the target.
Once the target location was established, the bomb aimer took over with the help of a computerized sight.
The computer worked out the exact moment to drop the bomb, a bit like this.
Right, here we go again. I'll be sliding down at round about 25 miles an hour. The target's about 50 meters away, and the bomb weighs around about 5 pounds. So, I reckon I'll need to drop round about 10 meters away from the target. Right, let's give it a whirl, shall we? Bomb doors open. So even with all that technology, bombing was still hit and miss. But on one mission in 1943, the Lancaster made a dramatic breakthrough in targeting precision. With this, one of the most famous bombs of all time.
The Dam Buster raids were designed to hit 3 dams in the Ruhr, Germany's industrial heartland, to disrupt 75% of its water supply and paralyze German manufacturing. As the specially designed Upkeep bomb was released, it would be backspun at 500 revolutions per minute, so it would bounce over the water to evade defensive barriers. It would then sink on impact with the dam wall and explode at its base, the most vulnerable point. It took a lot of testing to get it right. To create the required angle and distance of bounce, the bomb had to be dropped from a height of precisely 60 feet. A pretty tall order given the accuracy of aircraft instrumentation at the time.
The solution was found in mounting 2 beams of light to the bottom of the plane. Set at a predetermined angle, they would only converge when the plane was flying at precisely 60 feet. Bombs away, Chalky! On the night itself, to avoid detection and flak, the aircraft of 617 Squadron flew at just 200 feet, all the way from RAF Scampton to Germany. The rest, as they say, is history.
But despite its devastating strike rate, the cost was high. 8 out of the 19 planes failed to return, and in the war as a whole, the total losses were close to 3,500. The Lancaster was generally expected to fly just 3 weeks before being shot down. While it won lots of important battles, it didn't bring the war to an end.
But this did. With the dropping of atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945, aerial bombardment took on a frightening new dimension.
2 atomic bombs wiped out miles of human civilization, killing tens of thousands of people in seconds. The Japanese surrendered to the Americans almost immediately, and the Second World War was effectively over. It was simultaneously the bomber's most successful and darkest hour.
And a B-29 superfortress like this, albeit slightly modified, was the plane that carried that dreadful load.
Introduced by the US Air Force in 1944, it was the biggest and most powerful bomber yet produced. Most importantly, its extended range took aerial bombing from Europe to the Far East. While a typical Lancaster bombing mission flew about 1,000 miles, this flew up to 4 times that.
The defining features of the B-29 all supported its longer range capability. A step up in power from its 4 engines to nearly 9,000 horsepower, 50% more than the Lancasters, meant that it could swallow up more miles more quickly. It also meant that it could fly at higher altitude, over 30,000 feet, to avoid the increased risk of fighter attack on longer flights.
That altitude is the reason for the plane's massive wingspan of 141 feet, larger wings being needed to keep the plane flying in thinner air. But the air at these altitudes isn't just thin, it's 50 degrees below freezing. So the B-29 became the first bomber to be pressurized to seal out the cold air and maintain a comfortable cabin pressure for the crew.
At the time, it may have been the biggest bomber ever made, but it still feels pretty cramped in here. Once in flight, there wasn't much moving around. The substantial crew of 11 pretty much had to stick to their stations for often 18 hours.
The best view in the house, sensibly enough, was from the cockpit, housed in what looks and feels like an aerodynamic greenhouse. There were no manned gunner turrets on the B-29. Instead, it had 10 remote-controlled guns which could be operated from within the aircraft, helping to reduce crew casualties.
But the B-29's bomb aimer still had a pretty vulnerable position right here in the nose. And initially, he would have operated in a very different way to his British counterparts on the Lancaster.
Because of the huge civilian casualties, the Americans initially didn't favour the area bombing strategy of the British, preferring instead to hit more precise industrial targets.
This called for precision targeting, and a new computer invented by a Dutchman called Carl Norden. And this is it. It works in a similar way to the Lancasters, using data on altitude, flying speed, direction, terminal velocity of the bombs, and wind speed to calculate the precise moment the bomb should be released.
But this went a step further. On a bombing run, it actually took control of the plane for the first time and released the bombs automatically, eliminating human error. As the war against Japan intensified, the Americans devised a new hit 'em hard strategy, moving away from specific targets to large metropolitan areas. It was a strategy which culminated in the two most indiscriminate bombing raids ever mounted, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The B-29 dropped the most devastating bombs in history, and in many ways, it was the ultimate piston-engine bomber. But it was also the last significant one. After serving in Korea in the early 50s, the bombing role of this plane came to an abrupt halt in the face of a new wave of technology.
The jet engine, smarter bombs, and advanced navigational and targeting avionics on much smaller aircraft like this.
The Tornado GR4 is an incredible piece of kit that demands highly skilled pilots. These chaps take 4 years and cost millions of pounds to train. This jet marks yet another revolutionary rethink of bomber design. Gone is the massive size, the high altitude flying, and the huge bomb loads. With a modest 45 feet wingspan, this bomber is smaller, much faster, and mind-blowingly agile.
So, after decades of getting bigger and bigger, how is it that bombers have suddenly shrunk back to a size similar to their oldest ancestors?
The main reason is survival. Traditionally, high-altitude flying was the way to stay safe. But to survive long-range missions in a world of more sophisticated radar, ground-to-air missiles and supersonic fighters, the Tornado's strategy is to fly low and fast, underneath the radar. And if it is detected deep in enemy territory, the Tornado has plenty more in reserve.
Getting away from your enemy remains the primary defense. And that requires extra power in bucket loads.
The Tornado's two Turbo Union RB99 jet engines power it to supersonic speeds of up to 1,452 miles an hour, and the engine's 9,000 pounds of thrust can be boosted to 14,000 pounds using afterburners.
But brute power on its own is not enough. Agility to duck and dive is also crucial, so the Tornado was designed with new improved wings, which employ variable geometry, which basically means they're adjustable.
The wings can be moved during flight to maximize agility at different speeds. Swing them forwards and the aircraft becomes more maneuverable at low speed, swing them back, and you're all set for aerodynamically maximized high-speed flight. Such is the confidence in the aircraft's ability to fly quickly out of trouble, it only has one defensive gun. The Mauser 27mm fires up to 1,700 rounds per minute.
Amazing though it is as an aircraft, none of these advances would have been worth it or indeed possible without these, the bombs themselves.
Traditionally, bombs were purely ballistic. The target had to be found for them, and without any power of their own, they had to be dropped in just the right place. Modern bombs communicate with the aircraft to maximize their precision and effectiveness. They're guided by their own onboard GPS and invisible lasers sent out from the plane.
This precision makes the bomb far more destructively effective, eliminating the need for the larger bomb loads carried by the larger bombers to make sure the target was hit. The Tornado can do the job with just one bomb.
Bombs like these paveways can in theory even find a specific room in a specific building. And, unlike the bombers of the past, this aircraft and its weaponry can operate night and day in almost any weather conditions. World War II's navigation technology has evolved into extremely accurate computerized systems using GPS and terrain-following radar. Gone are the hit-and-miss days of old. A Tornado pilot should always know exactly where he is and what he's firing at. and the massive amounts of information generated by the aircraft system can be taken in by the pilot on the head-up display. So what's it like to actually fly in? Well, I'm not going to find out for real, as that takes 4 years of training.
But fortunately for me and the crews, you can make all your mistakes first in a simulator like this. It's like a massive computer game, and it faithfully recreates all the functions and sensations of flying the plane itself. Here we go.
The parameters of flight, even down to the weather conditions in a particular part of the world at a particular time of day, can be programmed in.
The most striking development in comparison with the large bombers of old is in terms of the crew. Here, there's seating for two, the pilot and the weapons operator. Let's give it a whirl, shall we?
Only as the cockpit closes do I fully realize how little room there is in here. There's no room to spare around my head, my shoulders, or anything. I'm completely surrounded and somewhat overwhelmed by computers. If you struggle with PCs, this is not the place to be. Both afterburners are fired to get us up to takeoff speed and off the ground as quickly as possible. 0 to 200 miles an hour in 20 seconds. My mission is to drop the 2,000-pound Paveway 3 bomb hanging beneath our Island Arms dump, while flying in low at just under the speed of sound and avoiding fire from the warships protecting it.
We seem to be under attack. Yes, we like that. There's some feisty people down there who don't like us.
As we bank into the attack, the Tornado and the pilots within it are pulling 4 Gs. So the crew wear special G-suits to stop them blacking out. As the aircraft banks round, the suits tighten, stopping too much blood flowing to or from your brain. The target is located off the right wing. My job is to lock the laser onto the target, which guides the bomb to it.
Bombs away!
With the massive G-forces, massive speeds and onboard technology, the modern bomber takes its pilots right to the edge of their mental and physical abilities. A far cry from the wood and string machines that first lumbered into the air less than 100 years ago.